Well, hello everyone, and welcome once again to the Generations Bible Study. I'm Ken Jobst, and we're continuing our ongoing study of the book of Psalms. The study is entitled Psalms, the Heart of Worship. And this week's installment is our next to last installment of our ongoing study. So this week we're taking a look at Psalm number 139. Next week, we're going to be looking at 3 Psalms to conclude our study. Those are Psalms 147, 148, and 150. But today, for our lesson today, Psalm number 139, which is one of the Psalms of David, and it opens with the instructions for the director of music of David, a psalm. Now, Psalm number 139 is one of our favorite psalms. It's a familiar psalm, and just to let you know, it breaks down easily into 4 component parts, 4 stanzas, if you will. And to begin, I'm just going to read through the entire psalm, and then we'll go back and take a look at it in more detail. But from Psalm number 139 in the New International Version, "You have searched me, Lord, and you know me. You know when I sit and when I rise. You perceive my thoughts from afar. You discern my going out and my lying down. You are familiar with all my ways. Before a word is on my tongue, you, Lord, know it completely. You hem me in behind and before, and you lay your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me, too lofty for me to attain. Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go up to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, if I settle on the far side of the sea, even there your hand will guide me. Your right hand will hold me fast. If I say, surely the darkness will hide me, and the light become night around me, even the darkness will not be dark to you. The night will shine like the day, for darkness is as light to you. For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place, when I was woven together in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. How precious to me are your thoughts, God. How vast is the sum of them. If I were to count them, they would outnumber the grains of sand. When I awake, I am still with you. If only you, God, would slay the wicked. Away from me, you who are bloodthirsty. They speak of you with evil intent. Your adversaries misuse your name. Do I not hate those who hate you, Lord, and abhor those who are in rebellion against you? I have nothing but hatred for them. I count them as my enemies. Search me, God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there is any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting." Well, that's the entirety of Psalm number 139. And as I've mentioned, it's a Psalm of David, and it really breaks into 4 separate parts. But before we break it into the parts, I want to call your attention to how personal this psalm is. And if you went through the psalm and circled every time the psalmist says the word I or me or my. You'll notice that practically every verse, almost every verse, has a reference, a first person reference to themselves. So this is a psalm that is very personal. It's not a psalm that's about God as an academic interest. This is a personal psalm. So it's about a relationship rather than a proposition, right? There was a Canadian Christian author, seminary professor, named J.I. Packer. And J.I. Packer wrote a book called Knowing God. And he said that there's a world of difference between knowing about God and knowing God. So Psalm 139 is about knowing God. And it tells us this because its author uses that first person personal pronoun consistently throughout. It's about me. It's about my relationship with God. So to break down the psalm a little bit, as I mentioned, the psalm is in 4 big stanzas. And the first stanza runs from verse 1 through verse 6. And this stanza is a consideration of God's omniscience, which means that God knows everything, right? As a matter of fact, the first verse says, "You searched me, Lord, and you know me." Now, the word know, as like the word knowledge, K-N-O-W, in the Bible is always a word that has much greater depth than we think of in the English language. You know, I can say that I know someone. Maybe if I've ever met them, I say to other people, "Oh, I know so-and-so." When perhaps the fact is we just shook hands once. Well, in the Bible, the word know, meaning knowledge, means a deep, personal, and intimate knowledge. To really, really know someone. So that's the type of knowledge that God has of each of us. It's deep and it's personal and it's intimate knowledge. God knows stuff about us that we don't know about ourselves. That's how thoroughly we are known by God. But watch, in this opening stanza, these first 6 verses, there's also the statement that God is familiar with me in all my ways. God already knows my actions, right? God knows when I sit and when I rise. God knows my going out and my coming in. So God knows my actions. Well, God also knows, according to the psalmist, not simply my actions, but God knows my words. God knows what I'm saying. And beyond that, look, okay, that might not be so special about knowing my actions, because you could sit around and watch me do my actions. You could sit around and listen to me speak my words. But before the word is formed on my lips, God knows it already. So God knows not only my actions and my words, but God also knows my thoughts. So God knows what I'm thinking before I say it. God knows, and this is important. God knows my intent before the action is performed. So now this, the Greeks called this omniscience. They said it's about knowing everything. To be omniscient, omni meaning all, God is all-knowing. Now, most of us like to be known, right? It's a nice thing. And as a matter of fact, some people seek after fame, right? They want to be known, quote unquote, by the widest number of people possible. Well, um, we are social creatures, that's true, and it is comforting sometimes for us to be known by a wide variety of people. But you know what? I don't know very many people at all that want to be completely known by someone else. Outside of spouses, within the context of marriage, marriage gives the opportunity for one to know another as completely as this world allows. But this is saying that God even knows our thoughts before we speak them, and God knows our intents before the action comes around. So we're in this situation of being totally known by God. Now, that might be a little uncomfortable. Well, let me edit that. That's going to be incredibly uncomfortable because each of us have things that we don't want to be known to the world, right? But watch this. Even though God knows us completely and entirely, even though God knows the most awful thing we've ever done, said, or thought about, God still loves us enough to pursue us. Now that is amazing. That's amazing that even in the face of knowledge that is not flattering to us, that God is not dismayed by that knowledge, and as a matter of fact, God loves us enough to seek us out and to pursue us with his love. So this first stanza, the psalmist is telling us, look, God knows everything. God is omniscient. The second stanza begins in verse 7 and runs through verse 12. And it opens with this wonderful question, where can I go from your spirit? Now, where can I flee from your presence? If you remember all the way back, biblically all the way back, to the Garden of Eden, and remember the episode, it's the first episode in the Bible. Eve has taken the fruit and eaten it, and Adam has eaten it too. They come to the knowledge that they are naked, and what do? They go and hide themselves. Adam and Eve fled from God's presence, which of course we understand is futile. There's nowhere you can go to flee from God's presence. But they hid themselves in the Garden of Eden and covered themselves with fig leaves in an attempt to flee from God's presence. Now, what happened? Well, of course, God is walking in the garden in the cool of the day and asks the question, Adam, Adam, where art thou? That's the first question in the Bible, is Adam, where are you? And it's still a good question. It's a good question that God asks us. And it's a question that we should be asking ourselves from time to time. Where am I? Am I moving closer to God, or am I moving further away from God? Where am I? What am I facing? Am I facing my problems, or am I facing the God who is greater than my problems? So where can I go from your presence? Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go up to the heavens, you are there, right? You're already in heaven. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there. And by the way, the term depths there in the Hebrew is Sheol, meaning the underworld. Some translations translate it as Hades. So the Greek would be Hades, the Hebrew would be Sheol. Hades means the unseen realm. Now, we need to be careful. We're not talking about hell here. We're talking about Hades. And now there's a little shade of difference there. Actually, it's a pretty important difference. Hell is understood as a place of punishment. Hades, or the unseen realm, which is what it literally translates as, is simply the abode of the dead. So here we're not talking about hell. We're talking about Hades. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, if I settle on the far side of the sea, even there your hand will guide me. Now that's beautifully poetic, right? And I want to unpack that a little bit. Verse 9 says, if I rise on the wings of the dawn, right? The Greek goddess of the dawn, the Greek goddess of the sunrise, was Aurora. And the idea was that Aurora had wings. And as the sun would come up, the notion was that Aurora was flying across the world. You know, that the sun would fly across the world. Now, this fascinates me. I love this piece. How quickly does the sun come up? Well, there's a couple different answers to that question, right? But what is it that the rotation of the earth is going something like, 1,000 miles an hour? I don't know. You know, these round figures. But if there are 24 time zones around the earth, and it's 24,000 miles, roughly we're talking about every 1,000 miles is another time zone. So 1,000 miles an hour, we've got the earth spinning on its axis. That's pretty fast, right? That's the wings of the dawn going 1,000 miles an hour. Or consider this, even faster is the speed of light, right? I mean, how quickly does light move? And the psalmist is saying that if I rise on the wings of the dawn, that is, if I move 1,000 miles an hour, if I move at the speed of light, right? But by the way, another, I can't outrun God. God's already there. If I'm moving 1,000 miles an hour, when I get there, God's already been there. If I'm moving at the speed of light, when I get there, God has already been there and is waiting on me, right? Say, well, where have you been? But by the way, another way to say this, if I rise on the wings of the dawn, another way to say that is the image is if I go to the east, if I go toward the dawn, if I go eastward, God, you're already there. And if I settle on the far side of the sea, right? Now, the sea that's being referred to there, of course, is the Mediterranean. So if I went to the far side of the sea, that means that if I went to Spain or Tarshish, if I went all the way to Gibraltar, you're already there when I get there. So the psalm is saying poetically, if I go up, if I go down, if I go east, if I go west, whatever direction that I go, you are already there. Your right hand will hold me fast. Now, it's a comfort to know that God is everywhere present, that we cannot outrun God, we can't hide from God. Where can I flee from your presence is what the psalmist is saying. And God is present in God's glory in heaven, right? God is present in God's power here on earth. God is present in God's judgment in hell. God is present in God's grace in his people. So where can I flee from God's presence? What wonderful image there. So the psalmist has established in the first stanza, the psalmist has established God's omniscience, that God knows everything. In this stanza, the psalmist establishes that God is already everywhere present. Now that's a revolutionary idea in the ancient Near East, because gods were typically tied to localities, right? The nation had a god, and if you went outside the boundaries of that nation, then that god had no power. This is a God who is powerful and present everywhere, a universal God. So God is omniscient, knows everything. God is everywhere present. He is omnipresent. And then stanza 3, the third stanza, verses 13 through 18, we establish God's omnipotence, which means God's complete and total power. And this is shared with us in I think, a very important way. But it's I don't want to say it's subtle. It's important, and it's right there for us. Verse 13, we're talking about God's omnipotence, his power. Listen to how the psalmist praises God's power. He says this, "For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made." By the way, that phrase, fearfully and wonderfully made, was the title of a book by Philip Yancey about 20 or 25 years ago. He wrote a book entitled Fearfully and Wonderfully Made. And I highly recommend it. It's a tremendous book about how we are shaped as human beings by the hand of God. So I recommend it to you. Fearfully and Wonderfully Made by Philip Yancey. He's a physician and talks about how God has created us to have, kind of healing properties within us, how we've been protected from certain things, how the design of our body is just absolutely perfect for the demands that are placed on us. Very, very interesting read. My frame was not hidden from you, says verse 15, when I was made in the secret place. I was woven together in the depths of the earth. Now, the psalmist is making the case for God's omnipotence, that God is all-powerful. And I want you to see and appreciate how the psalmist is making that case. Whenever the psalmist is talking about God's power, it's always about God's creative power. Now, in the world, we tend to measure power in terms of destructive potential. What's a powerful nation? Well, a powerful nation is a nation that has atom bombs. What's a powerful nation? It's a nation that can raise a 1,000,000-man army. And what do armies do? Well, for real, armies kill people and break things. That's what their function is. But the world tends to measure power in the number of things they can break. God measures power in terms of creativity. How much can you create? Because watch this, right? Well, watch. It takes a Rembrandt, it takes a Michelangelo, it takes a Renoir to make a masterpiece, right? To paint a painting, it takes years of study, and it takes skill, and it takes dedication, and it takes vision and insight, and it takes creativity to create a painting. But a 2-year-old can destroy it. If you give a 2-year-old, a knife or a cigarette lighter or other paint or whatever, a 2-year-old can destroy something that it took someone a lifetime to build, right? So destructive power is easy. Creative power is hard. And creative power is what the psalmist is focusing in on. And the psalmist is focusing in on something that is a miraculous creative power, the ability to create life. right? Now, okay, you can say, well, life gets created all the time. Couples get together and birds and bees and there you go. Well, no, that's not what I'm talking about. Because God designed that to be the way in which life would come about. God is the author of all life. So God is powerful in being creative and a creator. Now, a lot, how do I put this? Sometimes we overlook or we compartmentalize God's creative power. We think that God got finished with creating all the way back there in the first chapter of Genesis. But God as creator is still vital to our understanding of God today. God is a creating God. And creativity, right, is part of, is an attribute of God, that God creates. What Satan destroys, right? Satan is a destroyer. He wants to destroy us reputationally. He wants to destroy us physically. He wants to destroy us however he can sow discord, right? He's a destroyer of truth. He's a destroyer of beauty. He's a destroyer of all the cardinal virtues. God is a creator. And no matter, you know what? Maybe that's what makes the devil so mad. That the devil can't create things. All the devil can do is destroy things. And I think there's something to that. Now, so we're considering then in the first stanza, we're considering that God is omniscient. Second stanza, God is omnipresent. Third stanza, God is omnipotent. God is all powerful. Well, right there, you pretty much cover the bases in terms of the basic attributes of the God, basic attributes of God. That God is omniscient, knows everything. God is omnipotent, has all power, and God is omnipresent. God is everywhere at the same time. What does that leave? Right? What do you do with a God who is omniscient, omnipresent, and omnipotent? What do you do with that kind of a God? Well, stanza 4 tells us what our response logically should be, right? Now we kind of go on a little excursion before we get to the point here. But and this may be a little bit troubling when we read it at first blush, but let's dig into it. In verses 19 through 24, we're going to see what the response is, given that God is omniscient, omnipresent, and all-powerful, omnipotent, right? Here's what our response should be. Verse 19 says, "If only you, God, would slay the wicked. Away from me, you who are bloodthirsty." Now, watch what the psalmist is saying here. The psalmist is saying that the wicked, the bloodthirsty, those with evil intent, misusers of the name of God, what should our attitude be toward those? Right? Well, we should align ourselves correctly to be aligned with God against bloodthirstiness, against evil intent, against wickedness, right? So our appropriate attitude toward rebellion against God, our appropriate attitude toward being dedicated toward evil would be, as it's expressed in verse 21, do I not hate those who hate you, Lord? Now, watch. Okay. I understand we're supposed to love everybody. And I get it. That this basically, we're boiling this down to love the sinner and hate the sin. But understand that there will be those who become so identified with their rebellion and they become so identified with evil intent and wickedness that somebody's got to stand up and draw a line and say something, right? So what the psalmist is saying is that God, in a world that's full of wickedness and evil intent and those who oppose you and oppose your sovereignty, mark me down to be on God's side, right? That's verse 21. Now, in verse 22, verse 21, do I not hate those who hate you, Lord, and abhor those things that are in rebellion against you, which is, that's appropriate. I have nothing but hatred for them. I count them as my enemies. Okay, the enemies of God, enemies of mine. Okay. But we come down to verse 23 and 24. And verse 23 and 24 sum up our response to a God who is everywhere present, has all knowledge, and is all powerful. And it's this: search me, God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. Because, okay, God, if I know that you're all these things, that's going to make me anxious, right? Know my anxious thoughts. See if there is any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. Now, a couple of things I want to say about that. In the conclusion of it all, in these last two verses of the psalm, the conclusion of it all is this: God, search me. Search me. Here I am, and I open myself to your examination. Search me, know me, test me. Right? Test me. And then finally, lead me. Now this is so profound. The first thing, God, I want you to search me. It's like going through airport security, search me. And know me. Understand my intents. And I want my intent to be understood, to be in alignment with your plan, right? Search me, know me, test me, and know my anxious thoughts. Because God is going to test us only to improve us along the way. Each of us needs to be open to spiritual improvement. And remember, it's only a test. God is opening new doors for us with these tests. And then lead me. Lead me. Well, in this very last verse, in verse 24, there are two ways mentioned. See if there's any offensive way in me. That's the pathway that leads to offense. And then lead me in the way everlasting. Now, that basically sounds like there's two different ways. There's a way of offense, that's one road, and there's a way everlasting, that's another road. So we think of these two different divergent roads. It might be more appropriate for us to think of the way everlasting as the only real road, that there's one road, and that if we are off that road, then we are in an offensive way. So an offensive way may be any way that is off the way everlasting. So the bottom line of this is God's way is the way that we need to be led in, because it is the only way everlasting. And there may be 1,000 different roads that lead us off. We can wander off the path here, hither, and yon, right? But we need always to be searchable, knowable, right? We need to be open to the Lord. We need to be testable, and we need to be able to be led, right? So the argument of the entirety of Psalm 139 boils down to this. It boils down to, since God is inescapable, right? Adam and Eve thought they could escape from God if they would hide. But since God is inherently inescapable, then we should live openly before God. right? Not try to hide. Understand that life is not a game of hide and seek with God. We need to live openly with God. We need to live righteously before God. We need to do the right thing. And finally, and maybe this sums up the whole thing, we need to live a holy life before God. That means a life that's set apart for God's purpose. John Wesley, who was the founder of the Methodists, had a watch night service. And in his watch night service, he had a particular prayer that I can paraphrase it a little bit. But his prayer was this, that in the upcoming year, and this was a prayer that they would pray during watch night. In the upcoming year, he prayed, Lord, use me for your purpose, or set me aside for your purpose. That what John Wesley wanted was the assurance that he would live holy before God, WHOLLY, that he would live completely before God, and that he would live holy, HOLY, before God. And so that was his prayer every watch night. And it was the prayer that he wanted to go into the new year with. He wanted to go into the new year knowing that if God wanted to use him in this ministry, in this place, he wanted God to know that he was fine with that. If God wanted to set him aside for a particular purpose, or to order his steps and order his stops, that whatever God's will was for his life, John Wesley was agreeable to it. And that was his watch night prayer for 30-some years, for an incredibly, incredibly long time. Well, that brings us to the conclusion of this particular lesson on Psalm number 139 and our lesson of Psalms, the heart of worship. We want to invite you to make some comments now, and we'll take our phones off mute, and we'll do that. And for our YouTube audience, God bless you. We will see you very soon. God bless you. Take care. All right.